I know that you know that I know what Polarium knows that I know that I think you know that I think I got lost around here somewhere. Hello, everyone. Bront, CatHerder here. We're having some fun talking Raid Shadow Legends, and we are here to talk about all the different weird things that work in Raid in ways that you may not expect, you may just not know, or may not understand. Now, this is not me accusing you guys of not knowing Raid. It's just that Raid has a lot of undocumented features, might be a good way to put it. There's a lot of things that just work differently. They're not documented well. Sometimes they're not documented at all, but they're the little things that can actually make a huge difference in how you build your teams and whether or not your teams succeed or fail against certain bosses and against certain content. So I want to cover all of those things. Some of them might be simple, some of them might be very complex. I'm not going to dive too deep into the weeds on some of the more complex ones, but I'm going to try to explain them the best I can. And hopefully you guys will find some value from this video. Give me a chance to get a subscription, get that like and subscribe, smash that subscribe button. I definitely appreciate it. You guys have been awesome in supporting me, and I definitely appreciate the support of all you subscribers, all you members, all my folks on Twitch. You guys are all awesome. So without much further ado, let us get into the subject right after this word from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Marvel Strike Force. Marvel Strike Force is a free-to-play mobile squad RPG. You can build teams with your favorite Marvel heroes and villains. Power up your favorite Marvel characters, complete missions, unlock your resources, and fight to save the universe from threats like Doctor Doom and Apocalypse. Use my link below or scan the QR code to get started. You can recruit characters from throughout the Marvel Universe, including Iron Man, Wolverine, Deadpool, Thor, and more. Look, I've got even Spider-Man on my team. You can play PvE and PvP, use your roster in the story campaign, as well as things like Blitz, Arena, Alliance War, and massive weekly Alliance battles. Even go head-to-head with other players in the Cosmic Crucible. Join an Alliance, play with your friends, or make new ones and complete raids, and earn rewards for you and your Alliance. Collect heroes from all over the Marvel Universe. This month you can actually get a free character, Agatha Harkness, for just logging in. You can also unlock Blade and his team of Night Stalkers this month as well in special events. Building teams and improving your heroes is key to success in a game like this. Use your roster of heroes to build balanced teams. Heroes have abilities and specials that work together, allowing complex team building strategy and teammates who can help amplify their team's power together. Use my link below or scan this QR code and grab the game for free. Use promo code Halloween to get 100 free shards of Zombie Iron Man, 600k gold, and 480 level 2 training manuals. Download it today, and thank you from Marvel Strike Force for sponsoring this video. First one we're going to talk about here is auras. And there's some confusion with some people about how auras work because it's not particularly well spelled out. Now, auras are generally, they'll tell you a stat that they're going to boost and an area they boost it in. And there's a lot of people that don't actually catch the fact that not all of these auras are in all battles. So Morrigane's here is a 19% speed aura in all battles. Whereas Canderfon here, aka Candy, he is a attack percent aura in arena only. So this aura may show up. In fact, you can set him to the lead, and it won't complain about the fact that you don't have an aura for any content. But if you're doing it for faction wars, you're doing it for dungeons, you're not going to get that attack bonus. So generally, you're going to find you have the all auras, you've got arena auras, you've got faction crypt auras, you've got Doom Tower auras, and I think the other one you're really going to find is I think there's one or two champions that have a campaign aura even. But if you're doing content like Clan Boss, either Hydra or the regular Demon Lord, you need an all battles aura. Same for Centranos. And an all battles aura is generally preferred as far as how flexible a champion is. It does, however, often give you a hint as to where that champion might be most useful. And I say might be because sometimes the auras don't actually match up to where they're useful, but they're often where Polarium thought they might be useful. The other thing you're going to find is area auras are going to generally be better than auras in all battles. So for example, we've got Morgane here. She's got a 19% in all battles. We've got Podrick here. He's got a 25%, which is bigger than the 24% you're going to get for all areas, but it's only in dungeons. So very good in dungeons. It's a good aura, but it's only available in dungeons, so you have to be aware of that. The other thing you need to be aware of is when this 25% takes place and where it takes place. This is not a 25% of all the speed. So if we take a look at Podrick here, Podrick has a base speed of 112 and he currently has a speed of 339. That 25% is not off this 339, it is off of this 112. So he's going to get an extra 27, 28 points of speed, which is still very, very good. He is not going to be getting 3 times that because he happens to have 3 times the speed. The other thing to be aware of, if you're building a speed tune, if you're looking for a specific exact speeds for like a clan boss run, make sure you calculate the aura in how you're tuning the team. I know Deadwood Jedi's calculator, for example, will actually allow you to put in an aura, even if you don't have to order them in the correct order in the calculator itself. So that can be very helpful for figuring out what speed's actually going on, what your true speed is. But also, if you're tuning an arena team, for example, if you're not careful, you can have a debuffer, for example, not be as fast as a nuker because their speeds can be so close that this extra percent aura buff can make a difference. Now, there's other things that can interfere that can cause a problem with that and disrupt that as well. But specifically, we're talking about the aura here. Make sure you're aware of where the aura helps. Now, that does mean that, for example, a 33% HP bonus is not going to be off of the 60k HP that he has right here. It's going to be off of the almost 18k HP he has there. It's still a good 30% buff. So these auras are still very good. They are very useful. Sometimes you cannot be a slave to an aura because you might need to have them order in a different way, and we'll get into that in just a second. The next one that people don't always understand is that champion order matters. And this is a great example of why champion order matters, but we're going to get into this one in a minute. The first thing that makes sense with champion orders that matter is that AoE damage, so damage that hits all of these champions, doesn't happen simultaneously. Instead, it goes to the first champion, which is the lead guy right here, then goes to the next one, then goes to the next one, then goes to the next one, and then goes to the next one. Why is this important? Well, you can have passives for champions like Vogoth that we'll pull up right here. I just pulled him out of my vault specifically to talk about him. Here he is. Vogoth has this wonderful passive where he heals all allies by 50% of the damage received. So if you hit him, he then immediately heals a bunch of people. So oftentimes Vogoth is best as the last champion hit, because if he's at the first champion hit and he heals all your team, well, your team might not have been damaged. So at the end of the result is they'll have all taken some damage and he won't have healed it. So if you put him at the end, he will then heal them all. Or better yet, if you're running double Vogoth, which is a thing in some comps, especially for Bommel, you'll have one Vogoth in the front who will take the damage initially, heal everybody enough so they should be able to take the big AoE nuke. Everyone else takes damage, and then finally Vogoth then takes the final damage, and that second Vogoth heals everyone else back up as well. So there's a good chance you're actually better off after you've been attacked than you were when you started with that particular damage. The other place that can be important is if you're in arena, for example, and you're worried about sheeping the opponent. So the first person that gets hit, they process all of their damage, buffs, and debuffs first. Although actually, I believe the damage will process first on everybody, and then a debuff will process, and then another debuff will process. So it doesn't quite work where everything happens to one champion first. But what can happen is if you have a debuff that could be placed on somebody, it can actually interrupt the skill midway through. So if you have big sheep on some of your champions, you want sheep to be further up in the turn order. So ideally, you'd like your lead to have sheep if you can. If you can't, that's fine. Then your number 2 person should have your best sheep. Your number 3 person should have the next best sheep. Your number 4 person have the next best sheep. Obviously, that's relying on you to have multiple champions with the sheep blessing, but that's one of the ways that that can work as well. Also, counterattack and ally attacks also work based off of this turn order. So in this case, I've got 2 different ally attacks, and they are ally attacks with every champion. And to be fair, ally attacks with random champions don't work this way. They randomly pick the champions. But for ally attacks with all champions or all allies, even if it's all other allies, in the case of Fat Man's, for example, they will attack, and Podrick will go first, then Mikage, then Kymar, then Newt, then Newt. Why is that important? You want the Newts to actually hit through the shield on these ally attacks. So you want them to be the last people hitting. Whereas there's not any debuffs on Podrick, there's not any debuffs on Mikage's A1, there's not any debuffs on Kymar's A1 that we really care about in this particular case. So these are 3, maybe 4 or 5, depending on the blessing, hits on the shield before you get to a Newt. And if that's drop the shield, that means Newt's going to get more freeze attempts against the boss, more turn meter control, better results. If one of these, for example, is a decreased speed champion, that's another way to do it. So the decreased speed champion you want further back as well to get a chance to get decreased speed through the shield. This is also useful for counterattacks. If you've got an AoE counterattack champion, like if you're using a Valk for this, or a Martyr, they will attack your team, and then your team will counterattack in turn order, because that's how they were also hit for the damage. So keeping the turn order in the right order makes a lot of sense. And that is one of the reasons why you may end up building a team that doesn't use an aura. Because, for example, Newt's got this wonderful accuracy aura, and it might actually be helpful in Fire Knight. But if you need Newt in the back because you're using ally attack, then putting him in the lead with that aura is hurting your team. So team order is something to be aware of when building a team. Turn meter can be a little confusing at times, particularly because the way the turn meter system works is champions will fill beyond 100% before they take turns. So for example, here I've got Armands on this team here. I will drain everybody's attack. They will not get a chance to take a turn. But if you look at this here, he should have gone immediately again because he should have filled his turn meter well over 100%. But everybody got a little bit of turn meter before he took his next turn. Every time the turn meter happens, unless somebody takes an extra turn explicitly, the turn meter ticks just a little bit and everyone goes faster. You'll also notice here that Odin is the next person to go, at least it looks like that, because he has this extra turn meter. But if there was a turn meter boost, for example, it is quite possible for somebody else to overtake Odin, either on the other team or on this team, if there's additional turn meter. So what happens is this fills up to 100%, and then triggers the next person to go. Then when that person goes, the turn meter takes a little bit of time and just moves a little bit forward. And then it checks to see who has the highest turn meter, regardless of what percentage it's at. Usually it's over 100 at some point in time. So it will then take that person that's the highest over 100 and they'll go next. And it won't knock anybody else's down and they'll continue to go. Why is this really important? Well, this is part of why the turn meter can be a little finicky. This is why tunes can be very picky as well, because you can have champions that are 1 speed off from each other, but they can drift apart farther depending on where they take their turns, to the point where people can even interrupt a 1 turn speed increase at some point in time. This is where in Clan Boss, for example, it's not easy to just tune, and why we have a calculator to deal with the turn meter boost. In fact, if you look at the Deadwood Jedi calculator, you can actually hover over each turn or each champion and see where their turn meter at is any particular time. And you'll see it's well over 100 many times, and many champions are often taking turns while it's over 100. The other thing that can be very important for is if you're trying to lap another champion. So generally, speed is speed. So if I have 300 speed, I'm going to go twice as often as somebody that has 150 speed. But depending on the rounding, depending on what else can happen, I won't necessarily always take 2 turns to their 1. I'll generally take 2 turns to their 1, but whether or not I take my second turn before they take their first can be hit or miss. So you sometimes need to have a little bit of extra speed. Turn meter boost can also throw that off quite a bit, and that's also why things like turn meter boost from masteries can help disrupt tunes. They're so sensitive on what the turn meter is, where the turn meter percentage is, when it happens exactly, that simply a 5% boost to your turn meter once can throw off an entire tune and possibly throw it off 5 turns down rather than on the turn it happens. So turn meter is very complex and there's a lot going on there, but just be aware that Just because you have this filled bar or just because you have 100% turn meter doesn't mean you're actually going next. And that's also important for dealing with the revives. There's a couple of champions that revive at 100% turn meter, but that doesn't mean the champion is going to go. And Cora is actually a good one. She'll revive Narcissus with a 100% turn meter. Doesn't mean Narcissus is going to be the next person to go because, for example, Rhonda here might actually have a 105% turn meter at the time or 110. Other champions may have a faster turn meter. And then when that person takes a turn, other champions go. And if there's somebody significantly faster than Narcissus, they may actually jump over Narcissus' turn meter just because of that extra time tick. Turn meter is very complicated. Just be aware that 100% doesn't mean goes next. In particular, that's where Cardinal is a very good reviver. Cardinal is the only reviver that revives somebody with maximum turn meter. So their turn meter, when it says full, means that they go next. So anyone who goes to quote unquote full turn meter, they immediately will resolve their turns based off of how fast they are in the first place. This is also useful to know with Hegemons, for example. Hegemons technically go first, but the way they go first means that you can actually see who is going faster. You can actually take a look at the turn meter and see, for example, see that at the moment, I'm going to go before this Rhonda goes just because everybody's turn meter is more full than Rhonda's. Now, there's a chance that if their Rhonda is super fast, he may still outspeed my Narcissus, for example, but he's probably not going to outspeed my Odin, who has the 100% turn meter. But there is a chance. Just be aware that turn meter can be very tricky, and 100% in turn meter doesn't really mean 100%. There's a lot of math that goes into it, and I'm not going to dig into that math, honestly, because I don't necessarily understand exactly how it works. I'd have to actually probably watch some videos to break it down or maybe even look at the code. Just be aware, 100% turn meter, even a full turn meter bar doesn't mean that your champion is going next. This is also why against enemy bosses, you'll sometimes see that their turn meter gets full, but you'll have 3 of your champions that will then go even though their turn meters weren't full because they are that much faster than the boss. They're able to fill their turn meter just a little bit faster and push over the boss. So we talked about this a little bit when we talked about speed auras, but the way that the game works with speed, the speed you see is not always 100% the speed you actually have. And that's because you can have fractional speeds and they can make a difference. And this is why we have tools like Clan Boss calculators that help you deal with these speeds. So just looking here at Morgaine, you can see I've got masteries that have given me 3 speed, faction guardians have given me 10, and that's a flat 10, so that's easy. Empowerment's given me 10, so that's a flat 10. And then artifacts have given me 178. That could be flat, but in this particular case it is not, because I have 3 perception sets that give me 5% additional speed. So I have 15% additional speed based off of her base stats here. That is 15% of 112. That does not make a nice even number. So there is a fraction somewhere in this. And then on top of that, masteries. The reason I've got 3 extra speed, well, masteries specifically is going to be Lore of Steel, which we'll cover a little bit more, but that gives you an increase in base stats by 15%. So I'm getting an additional 15% of this 15%, which ends up being about 3, but it's not 100% perfect. So if I need to tune a team and I need to be at 313 speed for her, for example, I may not actually be at the right speed because I may actually be at 312.72. And I might actually be slightly too slow because that's how finicky everything is. Now, on top of that, she's got the 19% speed aura we talked about earlier. Well, that's another 19%. That adds another decimal that may round somewhere else. So that can be a big difference as well. So keep in mind that things like speed round off and they don't tell you where they're rounding. That's where some of the calculators help let you know whether or not it's slightly above 13 or slightly below 313. And that can make a huge difference, especially if you're trying to tune a team very tightly and you're worried about the speeds and you have champions that may only have 1 or 2 points of speed difference, or maybe have the exact same speed. Although that can be very dangerous to have multiple champions with exactly the same speed because sometimes they will bounce off of each other or go in different orders depending on other factors as well. So just be aware that fractional speed exists and that you should pay attention to it if your speed tune is super precise. Another thing to be aware of is that not all defense is created equal. Defense, as it stands, is there to decrease the amount of damage you take when you take damage. There's a bunch of stuff that can play into that. The easy one to deal with, of course, is ignore defense, which is very popular in Arena. One of the best reasons that ignore defense is super powerful because it cuts this defense down and reduces how much damage you can take. But one of the other important limits to deal with is that defense has a soft cap that's not really well documented. And that soft cap is 4,200. So defense from 1 to 4,200 works about the same no matter where you're at in that. It's some defense reduces how much damage you take at this number. Once you pass that 4,200, the amount of damage reduction you get from defense starts to lower significantly. And I don't know exactly how it lowers. I don't know if it's a flat number after that, but I do know that you gain significantly reduced returns for defense as far as taking less damage on defense over 4,200. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't build more than 4,200. I've got a Valkyrie right here we're looking at. Valkyrie is a defense-based champ. She throws shields up based off her defense, and those are not affected by that defense cap. So put all the defense there you want. The more defense, the better for a Valkyrie, for example, or anybody that does damage based off of defense. And honestly, in Arena and in other places where you might ignore defense, having more than that 4,200 gives you a bit of a cap. So if somebody's ignoring 10% of my defense on this particular champion, I'm still near the cap, which means 10% defense isn't really going to affect how much damage my Valkyrie takes by that much. Definitely worthwhile building additional defense. The other thing to consider is in places like Arena, where the enemy is going to be ignoring your defense, and there's some bosses that ignore your defense as well, building HP can give you more total survivability than defense. But increasing the overall amount of attack you can take means building more HP in addition to building more defense. The other thing that's important with this is if you look at some of the older clan boss guides for ways to build clan boss teams that are not the traditional unkillable teams, but the more traditional, I could take out the boss, there's a reason that many of them recommend about 2,800 defense, because 2,800 defense with an increased defense buff gets you to that 4,200 number. Being aware of where that number is, building PvE champions sort of towards that, realizing where you might encounter ignore defense, and then of course realizing what the champion build is going to be in general, will let you know how to build defense. So there's nothing wrong with going above the 4,200 number. As I mentioned, that can actually help with reduced defense, but you're also not getting as much as you might by investing in HP at that point in time as far as the survivability goes if you're not dealing with that ignore defense. Laura of Steel is probably one of the most misunderstood masteries in the game. What it does and what people are afraid of it doing are two different things. What it does is it plays off of stats you get from gear sets. It increases the benefits of gear sets giving you stats by 15%. This can be very good in the case of Stone Skin, for example. This is a good way to get additional speed out of the speed set, for example, more accuracy out of perception gear, that sort of stuff. Very, very helpful. It's not necessarily going to be a ton of extra stats, but it does add up. And especially in things like Arena, where you're counting every stat and it makes sense, or if you're struggling to get to certain thresholds, Laura Steel is great. On the other hand, Laura Steel has this weird idea that you cannot take it on a clan boss team, and that's not true. It just means that if you're worried about dealing with it in your true speed, you need to actually calculate your true speed, letting the programs, the calculators know that you have both Lore of Steel and that you're wearing perception set or speed set or anything else like that that's going to affect your space speed. That is where Lore of Steel kind of plays. Again, very good in Stone Skin, very good in protection, very good with speed set, can actually be very good for additional attack if you're using Cruel set, for example. It, however, does not affect things like your chance to counterattack, your chance to place debuffs with a set, It doesn't affect your ignore defense with the set. So it doesn't affect everything. It's not going to be perfect for every champion. But for the champions that it's going to be good for, this can give you enough extra stats to make a big difference between you hitting thresholds you need, or maybe taking a hit that you might not have been able to take otherwise, or resisting something that you might not have been able to resist, or preventing somebody from resisting something that you're hoping to try to afflict them with. So overall, Lore of Steel, very good mastery, but one of the most misunderstood masteries in the game. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about the mercy system. The mercy system is a pretty easy thing to misunderstand. It's documented okay. It's actually documented fairly well, but a lot of people don't quite understand how mercy works, or they think that they deserve to get something faster than they might otherwise, or they're not aware of how bad it is in a couple of cases as well. Just looking at the mercy system here, we explain it and we talk about epics, for example, from Ancients and Voids. So the first 20 summons you get, you have no additional mercy. Everyone after that you pull will have an additional 2% chance to get an epic. Now, what that actually means is that it's entirely possible for you to pull 65 non-epics in a row, because that 66th one is where you'll actually get to a guaranteed epic. Now, the chances of doing that are pretty astronomical at that point in time. I'm not going to calculate them out, but you're going to really struggle to go past about 30 to 40 without getting an epic, just given the rates that we've got. But it is possible to get 3 10 pulls, even 4 10 pulls in a row that have no epics. The other thing that can be a little tricky with them is that in Raid, nothing else resets it other than pulling an epic. So if you pull a legendary, for example, that will not reset your rates on your epics or your mercy for your epics. I don't know for sure. I suspect that if your mercy somehow hits where you are guaranteed both a legendary and an epic at the same time, which would be really hard to do, but if it happens, then I suspect you'll get the legendary over the epic, just because the legendary should take priority over the epic. But the other place that that's actually really important to understand how the mercy system works is in sacred shards. And sacred shards are really where it feels kind of bad for the way the mercy works. So if we go to the default chances here, sacred is a 6% chance to pull a legendary. You then can pull 12 of them without pulling a legendary before you start getting the mercy, but the mercy is only 2%. That means you can pull a total of 58 sacred shards and not get a legendary. And if you have a 2x, for example, the 2x only affects the base percent, not mercy. So if I pull 12 sacreds without hitting a legendary in mercy with a 12% chance in a 2x, I will only have an additional 2% chance to pull it on the next shard, and then another 2% on the shard after that. But this poor rate of mercy is part of why a lot of content creators will tell you that pulling sacreds is a good thing to save for fusions, and often will tell you to not pull on a 2x sacreds, because a 2x sacred isn't necessarily that much better. Yes, you're more likely to pull a legendary, you're more likely to pull them early, you're more likely to pull them in bulk, and for an early account that can be okay, but overall, you're still going to struggle with a bad mercy system. And those sacred shards can be super valuable for getting the summon rush points in fusions. So save them for fusions, save them for the 1+1 events where you're suddenly getting a chance to get 2 legendaries on a pull. The odds become much better for you overall because the rewards are much better at pulling 2 legendaries. So that's why saving your sacreds, don't just yeet them whenever you can. Try to save them for events where the rewards for pulling them is better than just pulling them themselves, because sacreds are just kind of okay for pulling legendary champs on points in champion chase, and they're just kind of okay for pulling at a 2x, because there's still a chance you could get absolutely murdered by RNG and just pull a ton of sacreds and not get a legendary. It's happened to a lot of people. I've gone over 30. Most people that have long-term accounts have gone over 30 sacreds without pulling a legendary. It feels bad. You're nearing 50% chance when you pull one, but it can happen. So there we go. That was 7 hidden features, I guess, in Raid, things that are not obvious in Raid that can help you improve your account, improve how you approach things, improve how you build champions, improve how you pull shards, hopefully help you be a better Raid player. So hopefully you found this educational. I'd appreciate if you get a chance to hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. Smash that if you can. Definitely appreciate all the support. Much love to you guys. Hopefully you are having a wonderful day. And until the next video, I'm Bront CatHerder.